March 20th, 1995. 11:58 p.m. Sing Sing Correctional Facility, New York. Thomas Grasso sits strapped to the electric chair, and he's smiling. Not a nervous smile. A genuine, almost peaceful grin that unnerves the execution witnesses staring through the glass. The executioner stands ready at the panel. The warden asks for final words. What Thomas says next will become one of the most haunting and bizarrely honest final statements in American execution history. But here's what makes this moment truly disturbing. Thomas isn't afraid. He's not begging. He's not crying. In fact, he seems almost relieved. The room falls silent. Thomas takes a breath and begins to speak about SpaghettiOs. If you want to hear what he actually said and understand why this execution haunted everyone in that room, smash subscribe right now, because this story gets darker than you can imagine. Thomas J. Grasso wasn't born a killer. He was born in 1962 in New York into poverty and dysfunction that would shape everything about his life. Short guy, only 5'4", overweight, frequently mocked, struggling with learning disabilities that made school a nightmare. By age 15, Thomas had his first arrest. Petty theft. By 17, he was addicted to alcohol and drugs. By 20, he was in and out of jail constantly. Small-time crimes. Burglaries. Robberies. Nothing violent initially. But Thomas had something dark growing inside him. A complete inability to control impulse. A recklessness that bordered on self-destruction. And an almost childlike detachment from consequences. His family tried to help, his mother especially. But Thomas was drowning, and he kept pulling himself deeper. By 1990, at age 28, Thomas was homeless, desperate, addicted, and about to cross a line he could never uncross. Two elderly people would pay with their lives for his desperation. December 24th, 1990. Christmas Eve. Tulsa, Oklahoma. 87-year-old Hilda Johnson lived alone in a modest home, a widow surviving on Social Security. Thomas broke into her house looking for money to buy drugs and alcohol. Hilda was small, frail, defenseless. She had no chance. Thomas strangled her with her own Christmas tree lights. The cord wrapped around her neck, her feet kicking, her hands clawing at the wire. He held on until she stopped moving. Then he searched her house. Found $20. $20. He also took her television and a small portable radio. Left her body on the floor and fled to New York. Police found Hilda the next day, still tangled in the Christmas lights. Her holiday decorations surrounding her corpse like a macabre scene. Her family was devastated. Their elderly mother murdered on Christmas Eve by a stranger for pocket change and used electronics. But Thomas wasn't done killing. July 4th, 1991. Independence Day. Staten Island, New York. 81-year-old Leslie Holtz, a disabled senior living alone, became Thomas's second victim. Thomas broke into Leslie's home, again looking for money. Leslie was confined to a wheelchair, completely vulnerable. Thomas strangled him with his bare hands. The old man fought as much as he could, but against a younger man, even one as small as Thomas, he had no chance. Thomas watched him die. Took $8 in cash. $8. He also stole Leslie's Social Security check and some small valuables. Then he casually walked out, leaving Leslie's body slumped in the wheelchair. A neighbor found him 2 days later. 2 elderly victims. 2 strangulation murders. Both for almost nothing. The pattern was clear. Thomas Grasso targeted the most vulnerable people in society, the elderly and disabled. People who couldn't fight back. And he felt absolutely nothing about it. Thomas didn't run far. Didn't have a plan. Didn't even really try to hide. He was arrested 3 weeks after Leslie Holtz's murder, caught trying to cash one of Leslie's stolen checks. When police connected him to both murders, Thomas confessed immediately. No lawyer present. No hesitation. Just admitted everything. Described both killings in disturbing detail, almost casually, like he was recounting a trip to the store. Detectives were stunned by his indifference. He showed no remorse, no emotion, no understanding of the magnitude of what he'd done. Psychiatric evaluations revealed Thomas had severe personality disorders, impulse control issues, possible brain damage from years of substance abuse. But he was deemed competent to stand trial. New York charged him first. Oklahoma would wait their turn. Thomas was looking at death either way. He seemed oddly okay with that. The trial was brief. The evidence overwhelming. Thomas's own confession damning. His court-appointed lawyers tried to argue diminished capacity, childhood trauma, mental illness. The jury wasn't convinced. In December 1991, Thomas J. Grasso was convicted of murdering Leslie Holtz. The prosecution pushed for death. New York had reinstated capital punishment in 1995, but Thomas's crime predated that. However, Oklahoma still had him for Hilda Johnson's murder, and Oklahoma absolutely had the death penalty. So New York sentenced Thomas to 20 years to life, knowing Oklahoma would likely execute him anyway. And that's exactly what happened. Oklahoma extradited Thomas in 1992, tried him for Hilda Johnson's Christmas Eve murder. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty. Sentencing phase took 2 hours. Death by lethal injection. Thomas showed no reaction, just nodded, like he'd expected it, like he'd already accepted his fate before the verdict was even read. Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Death row. When Thomas arrived in 1992, he entered one of the harshest death rows in America. Oklahoma doesn't play games with condemned inmates. The conditions are brutal, the guards unforgiving, the atmosphere heavy with despair. But Thomas adapted strangely well. He wasn't tough, wasn't intimidating, but he had this weird, dark humor about his situation that both disturbed and entertained other inmates. He'd joke about his execution, talk about death casually, make guards uncomfortable with his complete lack of fear. Other inmates either avoided him or found him fascinating. This short, overweight guy who'd killed 2 elderly people and seemed to have zero emotional response to anything. Guards noted he never had visitors. His family had abandoned him. No letters. No calls. Thomas Grasso was completely alone, waiting to die, and he seemed perfectly content with that reality. That contentment would become even stranger as his execution approached. Thomas spent his days reading mostly. Trashy novels, crime fiction, comic books, anything to pass time. He didn't exercise much. Didn't participate in programs. Didn't seek spiritual counsel. He just existed. Waited. Other death row inmates reported that Thomas would sometimes laugh to himself in his cell at night. Not maniacal laughter, just quiet chuckling, like he was watching a private comedy show in his head. Guards thought he was losing his mind. But psychiatric evaluations showed Thomas was fully lucid, just profoundly detached from reality's emotional weight. He understood he'd murdered 2 people. Understood he was going to die for it. He just didn't seem to care. No nightmares. No breakdowns. No desperate appeals to God. Thomas Grasso existed in a strange emotional void that even hardened death row veterans found unsettling. And, as his execution date approached, that void would produce one of the strangest final statements ever recorded. Thomas's lawyers filed the standard appeals. Argued ineffective counsel. Argued mental incompetence. Argued cruel and unusual punishment. Every appeal failed. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case. Governor Frank Keating denied clemency. The parole board voted unanimously against commutation. Nobody was fighting for Thomas Grasso, not even Thomas himself. His lawyers begged him to show remorse, to fight harder, to give them something to work with. He refused. Said he deserved to die. Said he wanted it to be over. This wasn't suicidal ideation in the traditional sense. Thomas wasn't depressed or self-harming. He just completely accepted his execution as inevitable and stopped caring about delaying it. His execution date was set, March 20th, 1995. Thomas marked it on his calendar with a smiley face. Guards who saw it were disturbed. 2 months before execution, anti-death penalty advocates tried to use Thomas's case to challenge Oklahoma's execution protocols. They argued lethal injection was experimental, potentially torturous, unconstitutional. Thomas's lawyers filed motions on his behalf. Thomas was furious. He didn't want delays. Didn't want to be a political symbol. He wrote a letter to his attorneys telling them to stop. I killed 2 people. I deserve to die. Stop trying to save me. The letter was leaked to press and caused a firestorm. Death penalty opponents called it evidence of mental illness. No sane person wants to die. Death penalty supporters called it justice, a killer taking responsibility. Media descended on McAllister. Reporters wanted interviews. Thomas refused all of them except one. A local journalist asked him if he had any regrets. Thomas's answer was chilling. Yeah. I regret I didn't get SpaghettiOs for my last meal. That quote would define his legacy. That wasn't a joke. Thomas was genuinely upset about his last meal. He'd requested SpaghettiOs, the canned pasta he'd loved since childhood. Simple, childish, oddly innocent request from a double murderer. But the prison kitchen didn't stock SpaghettiOs. They gave him spaghetti with meatballs instead. Regular spaghetti. Thomas was legitimately disappointed. Complained to guards. Wrote in a letter, I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this. When that quote hit the media, public reaction was split. Some people laughed. The absurdity of a killer caring more about canned pasta than his victims. Others were horrified. This trivialization of human life. This focus on something so petty while 2 families mourned. But it revealed something crucial about Thomas Grasso's psychology. He genuinely didn't process emotion or morality normally. To him, the SpaghettiOs disappointment was as significant as the murders. Everything existed on the same flat, emotional plane. That's what made him so dangerous and so strange. The last week of Thomas's life was bizarrely normal. He didn't write goodbye letters, didn't request special visits, didn't have spiritual crisis. He watched TV, read magazines, ate his meals, slept fine. Guards monitoring him for suicide risk were baffled. He seemed more relaxed than most inmates facing execution. 3 days out, a prison psychologist did a final evaluation. Asked Thomas if he felt remorse for his victims. Thomas said, I feel bad their families are sad. But I don't feel bad they're dead. They were strangers. The psychologist asked if he was afraid of death. Thomas said, no. Life's boring. Death's probably boring too. Doesn't matter. This wasn't bravado. This was genuine indifference. The psychologist concluded Thomas had severe antisocial personality disorder, but was competent for execution. The state would kill a man who didn't fear death, didn't value life, and cared more about SpaghettiOs than human beings. Drop a comment. Do you think executing someone who wants to die is justice or just state-assisted suicide? Because what happens next raises that question hard. March 20th, 1995. Thomas's execution day. He woke up at 6 a.m., ate breakfast, cereal, toast, coffee. Spent the day watching television. Game shows mostly. Price is Right. Wheel of Fortune. Guard said he seemed almost cheerful. At 3 p.m., he showered. At 5 p.m., they brought his final meal, the spaghetti that wasn't SpaghettiOs. He ate it anyway. All of it. At 7 p.m., the warden came to his cell. Asked if Thomas had any final requests, any calls to make, anyone he wanted to see. Thomas said no. The warden looked almost sad. Mr. Grasso, I have to ask, do you understand what's about to happen? Thomas smiled. Yeah, you're gonna kill me. It's cool. The warden left, shaking his head. At 10 p.m., they came for Thomas. Time to walk to the death chamber. The walk from death row to Oklahoma's execution chamber is 73 steps. Thomas counted them out loud as he walked, flanked by guards. 1, 2, 3. Like a child playing a game. Other inmates were silent, watching through their cell windows. Some prayed for him. Some just stared. Thomas kept counting. 42, 43. No fear in his voice. No trembling. Just steady counting. At step 61, a guard asked if he wanted to slow down. Thomas said, nah, let's get this done. By step 73, he'd arrived at the chamber door. A small room, clinical, with a gurney in the center. Witnesses already seated behind glass. The families of Hilda Johnson and Leslie Holtz in the front row, faces hard, waiting for justice. Thomas looked at them through the glass. Waved. Actually waved. Like greeting neighbors. The victims' families recoiled, horrified. Thomas seemed confused by their reaction. The guards guided Thomas onto the gurney. He climbed up himself, no resistance, lay down, positioned his arms on the armrests. They strapped him down, chest, arms, legs. 7 leather restraints, tight, inescapable. Thomas tested them, wiggled a bit. Yep, that'll hold, he said. Nobody laughed. The medical team entered. 2 4-lines inserted, 1 in each arm. Backup systems. Thomas watched them do it, fascinated, like observing a medical procedure on someone else. The warden stood near his head, asked the required question. Mr. Grasso, do you have any final words? This was the moment. The final statement. What killers say before they die often reveals their soul. Remorse, defiance, fear, rage, peace. The room went silent. Witnesses leaned forward. The families braced themselves. Thomas turned his head slightly, looked directly at the warden, and what he said next would haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Thomas's voice was clear, almost cheerful. I'd like to say that I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this. He paused. Everyone waited for more, an apology, an acknowledgement of his victims, something. But Thomas continued. And yeah, I killed 2 people, and I'm sorry their families are upset, but like, everyone's gotta die sometime, right? I'm not special. They weren't special. We're all just here for a bit. Anyway, I'm ready. Let's do this. Silence. Absolute silence. The victims' families were stunned. The press scribbled furiously. The warden looked physically ill. Guards exchanged glances. This wasn't the defiance they'd seen from other killers. This wasn't remorse. This was something else entirely. A complete absence of normal human emotion. Thomas actually smiled again, looked at the ceiling, relaxed his body, took a deep breath. Okay, I'm good. Do your thing. The warden signaled. The execution began. Sodium thiopental first. The anesthetic, supposed to render Thomas unconscious in seconds. The chemical entered his veins. Thomas's eyes followed the 4-line like he was watching a science experiment. Oh, that's cold, he said. His speech slurred. Weird feels nice, actually. His eyes fluttered, closed. Medical personnel checked for consciousness. He was out. Pancuronium bromide next. Paralyzes the lungs, stops breathing. Thomas's chest stopped rising. His body went completely still. Finally, potassium chloride. Stops the heart. The monitor showed his heartbeat slowing. Slowing. Flat line. 11:54 p.m. Thomas J. Grasso was pronounced dead. The entire execution took 8 minutes. Clean. Efficient. Painless. He died without fear, without struggle, without apparent regret. The witnesses filed out in disturbed silence. This execution felt wrong somehow. Not because of the method, but because Thomas had wanted it. He'd laughed at death, and death had obliged. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed the victims' families. Hilda Johnson's daughter spoke briefly. I don't feel relief. I just feel empty. He didn't care. He never cared. She was right. Leslie Holtz's son refused to comment, just walked away, shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Anti-death penalty activists seized on the case immediately. We just killed a man who wanted to die. That's not justice. That's assisted suicide. Pro-death penalty advocates countered. He murdered 2 innocent people. His mental state is irrelevant. The debate raged. Thomas's body was transported to the prison morgue. No family claimed it. No funeral planned. He'd be buried in the prison cemetery, a numbered grave, forgotten except for his bizarre final words. The SpaghettiOs comment went viral before social media even existed. Newspapers, talk shows, legal journals, everyone discussed the killer who cared more about canned pasta than human life. In the weeks after the execution, forensic psychologists analyzed Thomas Grasso's case extensively. The consensus: severe antisocial personality disorder, possible psychopathy, extreme emotional detachment, inability to process empathy or remorse. But here's what made Thomas unusual. Most psychopaths are manipulative, calculating, strategic. Thomas was just empty. He killed because he needed money and didn't care about consequences. He didn't enjoy killing, didn't fantasize about it, didn't plan it elaborately. He strangled two elderly people the way someone might swat a fly, an inconvenient obstacle removed without emotional investment. Dr. Michael Stone, forensic psychiatrist, later wrote, "Grasso represents the banality of evil. Not the dramatic, theatrical evil of serial killers, but the mundane, thoughtless evil of someone completely disconnected from human value." That disconnection explained everything. The lack of remorse, the SpaghettiOs obsession, the casual acceptance of execution. Thomas Grasso wasn't afraid of death because he'd never truly understood life. The SpaghettiOs comment became infamous. Late-night comedians joked about it. True crime books feature it. It became shorthand for absurd last words. But it also sparked serious ethical discussions. If someone wants to die, is executing them justice or just compliance with their wishes? If a killer shows no remorse, does that make execution more justified or more disturbing? Death penalty opponents argued Thomas's case proved the system was broken. Killing people who are mentally incapable of full human emotion isn't justice. It's eliminating the inconvenient. Supporters argued that regardless of his psychology, he'd murdered two defenseless elderly people and deserved execution. The debate continues decades later. And every time someone discusses strange last meals or bizarre final statements, Thomas J. Grasso comes up. The man who cared more about SpaghettiOs than his own life, or anyone else's. His legacy is absurdity wrapped around horror. In all the discussion of Thomas's bizarre psychology, the victims often got forgotten. So let's remember them now. Hilda Johnson, 87 years old, survived the Great Depression, raised 4 children, widowed for 12 years, volunteered at her church, loved gardening, spent Christmas Eves baking cookies for neighbors, murdered for $20. Leslie Holtz, 81 years old, World War II veteran, disabled in his final years but fiercely independent, had 5 grandchildren who visited weekly, loved baseball, never missed a game on TV, murdered for $8. These weren't statistics. They were people. People with families who loved them, lives that mattered, futures that were stolen. Thomas Grasso took all of that away without a second thought, and then complained about pasta. The victims' families never got closure. How could they? The killer didn't care enough to give them that. Thomas Grasso's case had limited legal impact, unlike some high-profile executions. No laws changed, no protocols revised. But it became a teaching case in criminal psychology programs, law schools, ethics courses. The question poses, what do we do with people who lack the capacity for remorse? Is executing them justice or just expedient disposal of damaged humans? Some jurisdictions began implementing more rigorous psychological evaluations for death penalty cases. Others argued psychology is irrelevant, actions matter, not mental states. Oklahoma continued executing inmates regularly. By 2024, the state has executed over 100 people since resuming capital punishment. Thomas was just one number in that count. But his case lingered in academic circles, in ethics debates, in true crime communities. Not because he was innocent or wrongly convicted, but because he represented something unsettling about human nature, the capacity for complete moral emptiness. Hilda Johnson's family scattered after her death. Her daughter moved to Arizona, rarely speaks about the murder. The trauma fractured the family. Leslie Holtz's son became a victims' rights advocate, speaks at parole hearings, fights for stronger sentencing. He's never mentioned Thomas Grasso by name publicly, refuses to give him that recognition. The detectives who investigated both cases are retired now. The prosecutor who convicted Thomas is a judge. The defense attorney left criminal law entirely, now does corporate work. The warden who presided over the execution retired in 2003, reportedly haunted by multiple executions he oversaw. Oklahoma still has the death penalty, still executes inmates. The debate continues. And somewhere in a prison cemetery in McAlester, Oklahoma, there's a simple numbered grave. No name, no dates, just a number. Thomas J. Grasso, forgotten except for his absurd final words. But here's what almost nobody knows. What wasn't in the media reports. 3 days before his execution, Thomas received a letter from Hilda Johnson's grandson. The letter said, "My grandmother was kind. She would have forgiven you. I'm trying to do the same. Not for you, for me. I hope you find peace." Thomas read the letter, sat in his cell for 2 hours, silent. A guard later reported he saw Thomas crying. Just briefly. Quiet tears. The only emotion anyone had ever seen from him. Thomas wrote back. Just 3 sentences. "Thank you. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Tell your family I'm sorry." He never mailed it. The letter was found in his cell after his execution. That moment of genuine emotion, that brief crack in his emotional void, it never made the news. The SpaghettiOs comment overshadowed it completely. Maybe Thomas Grasso did have some humanity buried deep. Just not enough. Never enough. An empty execution chamber. Gurney cleaned and prepared for the next condemned inmate. The cycle continues. Thomas J. Grasso's case asks uncomfortable questions we still can't answer. Can someone who doesn't understand empathy truly be held to the same moral standard? Is executing someone who wants to die justice or compliance? Do some people exist so far outside normal human emotion that they're beyond rehabilitation or redemption? There are no easy answers. Thomas murdered 2 defenseless elderly people for pocket change. That's undeniably evil. But was executing a man incapable of remorse justice or just elimination of a problem? You decide. What's certain is this. Thomas Grasso died as he lived, disconnected, indifferent, focused on trivial things while horror surrounded him. He laughed at death, and death had the final laugh. But somewhere in that darkness, maybe for just a moment, he felt something human. We'll never know if it was enough. This case still haunts me. If it affected you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dive true crime cases that ask our questions. Next up, the death row inmate who donated his organs to his victims' families. Click to watch that story now.